Okay, so let's tackle a mystery that I think a lot of us have faced. You get a goldfish, you put it in a nice, clean tank, the water is crystal clear, but a few weeks later, something's just off. Well, it turns out that what looks clean to us can actually be a toxic soup for our fish.
I mean, this is the classic starter pet, right? They're beautiful, they're graceful, and they're supposed to be easy. But the reality for so many people is just this frustrating cycle of sick fish, and you can't figure out why. So here's the secret. The problem isn't the fish, it's the water. And the biggest threats are completely invisible.
So, what's the deal? Why are these fish that seem so simple so surprisingly hard to keep healthy? Well, the answer isn't bad luck. It's all biology. And believe it or not, this is a solvable mystery. All the clues are hidden in the water chemistry. So come on, let's dive in and crack this case.
To really get what's happening, you have to look under the hood of your fish tank. You've got this invisible engine running 24/7, and it's called the nitrogen cycle. Think of it as nature's own little waste disposal system. And if you don't learn how it works, well, it can go south fast.
Just think about it for a second. In a lake or a river, fish waste gets diluted by, trillions of gallons of water. It just gets washed away. But in an aquarium, that's a closed box. Every piece of leftover food, all the fish poop, it all stays in there. It just builds up day after day. And that sets the stage for our number one enemy.
And that enemy has a name: ammonia. Your fish is constantly putting it out into the water through its gills and its waste. Now, here's the thing about ammonia. Even the tiniest amount is super toxic. It literally burns their gills, it damages their internal organs. It is, without a doubt, the number one silent killer in almost every new fish tank.
And this is why it's such a massive deal for goldfish. You gotta understand, these guys are basically ammonia factories. We're talking almost 10 times the waste of a lot of other common aquarium fish. So any advice you got that was meant for, say, a tiny little tetra, just toss it out the window. For a goldfish, the ammonia threat is on a completely different level.
So if ammonia is so deadly, how does any fish survive? Well, nature has this amazing solution. It's a 3-step process run by what I like to call your tank's invisible cleanup crew. These are beneficial bacteria. So step 1, a team of bacteria shows up and eats that toxic ammonia, turning it into something called nitrite. The catch? Nitrite is also really toxic. But then a second team of bacteria comes along, eats the nitrite, and turns it into the much, much safer nitrate. And that's it. That's the nitrogen cycle in a nutshell.
So, what happens when that little biological engine breaks down? Or what happens when that final byproduct, nitrate, just keeps building up and up and up? That's when your crystal clear water turns into a silent threat. Let's look at 2 classic ways this all goes wrong.
You might hear these called new tank syndrome and old tank syndrome. New tank syndrome is what happens when you set up a new tank and put a fish in before that bacterial cleanup crew has had time to grow. The ammonia just spikes like crazy. Old tank syndrome, though, is way sneakier. This happens in established tanks where you just top off the water but never actually remove any. Over time, the water gets more acidic, the pH crashes, and poof, your helpful bacteria just die off and you get another massive ammonia spike.
This is your fish literally screaming for help. When you see them just sitting at the bottom or gasping at the surface or rubbing themselves against decor, they're not just acting weird. They are in distress. Those red streaks you might see, those are chemical burns. This isn't some disease you can fix with medicine. It's a sign that their entire environment has become poisonous.
Okay, so if this whole natural cycle is so fragile, what's the fix? What do we do to step in and help our fish thrive? It all comes down to one simple, incredibly powerful, and absolutely non-negotiable action: the water change. This is how you manually hit the reset button on that ecosystem. And here's the part that trips up so many people. Even if your tank is perfectly cycled and healthy, that process always ends with nitrates. Now, nitrates are way less harmful than ammonia, sure, but they don't go anywhere. They just build up, week after week, like invisible pollution. The only way to get them out is to physically take out the old water and put in new, clean water. Which brings us to the million-dollar question, right? For a regular fish tank, you might hear people say, oh, change about 25%. But we've already figured out that goldfish are not regular fish. So for these little waste-producing champions, what's the real number? You might want to sit down for this. 50 to 90% every single week. I know, that sounds insane to a lot of people. But it's what you have to do to dilute all those nitrates and keep the water safe for a goldfish. They don't just tolerate big water changes,
They actually need them to thrive.
And your absolute best friend for this job is going to be an aquarium vacuum, sometimes called a gravel vac. It's a super simple tool that does two jobs at once. It siphons out the old water while also sucking up all the gunk and waste that's trapped down in the gravel. Honestly, it's a complete game changer for keeping a tank clean.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. The goal of a water change is to be surgical. You know, you want to remove the bad stuff, the nitrates and the waste, but you want to leave your good tenants, that bacteria cleanup crew, alone. It's a delicate balance. So here are the absolute must-dos and the definite don'ts.
First up, do use a dechlorinator on every single drop of tap water you add. The chlorine in our water is there to kill microorganisms, and it will absolutely nuke your beneficial bacteria. Do swish your filter sponge or media in the old bucket of tank water you just took out, never under the tap. This gets the gunk off without killing the good stuff. And of course, do this at least once a week. Consistency is everything.
And now for the big don'ts. Never, ever rinse your filter under tap water. Again, that chlorine is like setting off a bomb in the heart of your ecosystem. Don't try to scrub the entire tank spotless all at once. Your bacteria live on those surfaces. And please, don't do 100% water change and scrub down unless a vet tells you to. That's not a reset. That's a total system wipeout, and you're just starting the toxic cycle all over again.
So, I guess it all boils down to this one question. Are you just a pet owner, or are you an ecosystem manager? Because keeping a goldfish thriving isn't really about just remembering to feed it, it's about actively managing a tiny living world. And when you make that little mental shift from just owner to manager, everything changes. And that is the real secret to a happy, healthy goldfish that can live for decades.